Good. I was just racing back and forth, and I'm like,
Really?
oh,
Like running?
kind of hot. Well, over there and then back.
Oh.
So,
Power
not
walking.
power walking. Good morning, folks. So we are looking at today. We're looking at today making a tea for our plants. Making a tea for our house plants, for our garden plants, and then looking at, as that larger concept, looking at recycling things, reusing things. So we've had so many recipes and ideas for nourishing our bodies, but of course the plants are what nourish us. And when we nourish them, especially with plants, we're kind of creating this cycle, right? So I want to, so this is generally largely referred to as weed tea, sometimes compost tea, right? People use compost for this, and we'll kind of talk about that, the space for that in here. But here, for herbalists, the reason that I find this to be really, really valuable is that I know you do, I always have bags of things that are like questionably old in my apothecary. I have bags of tea that I'm like, I'm not going to use this tea, don't like this tea. I think it's been in there for 5 years. It's just kind of there. Things that you like bought a pound of nettles, not realizing that a pound of nettles is a lot, and you got that 2 years ago, and you're like halfway through it, and you're like, how good is this anymore, right? So we have a lot of things that we don't want to throw away because that's disrespectful to the plant. We want to find some value to it. This is a way of reusing those too. And then I'll talk about the kind of the concepts of the other herbs to use and the herbs not to use in a recipe like this, because we do have some limitations there. So why would we do this? Why would we make a blend like this? Well, we want to nourish, especially for, here you go. For houseplants. So when we have a plant that is in a pot, we have a limited amount of nutrients inside this soil, right? And those nutrients are being pulled out of that soil in order to create all of this growth. And we'll go in eventually, occasionally, and kind of cut back a lot of this, right? That's loss of resources. That's outward use of resources. And ultimately what's going to happen is the soil inside this pot becomes depleted of nutrients because those nutrients were used to make plants. And so we can use fertilizers, right? We can use fertilizers to grow them. We certainly should. The primary fertilizer that is of importance when it comes to especially house plants like that is nitrogen. And nitrogen is kind of one of the big things when it comes to nourishing plants. Nitrogen is needed in order to make foliage, to make leaves. Whenever you see leaf growth, that is a nitrogen-dependent process. And many house plants, that's all they are, just their leaves, right? They're just varying types of leaves. And so nitrogen goes into leaves and nitrogen comes from leaves. And so when we're using leafy plants in these weed teas, we're putting the nitrogen back into the plant material. And again, when we're taking those leaves off and we're throwing them in the compost, or we're throwing them in the trash, we're taking nitrogen out of the system. Do good, Kitty. Oh, is this the first time seeing your hair? Yeah, thanks. I love it too. It's very, very fun. Good morning, Dalton. Hi. So we're looking at making tea blends for your plants. Dust them off and show, oh yeah. Hold on just a moment. I need to take out the garbage. All right, bye-bye. Okay, let's see. So nitrogen comes from foliage, and so a lot of people like to, when they're out in the garden. So this applies to our houseplants. This also applies out in the garden to any plants that we have in the ground. Except that when a plant is growing in the ground, it is getting additional resources being put into the ground. Right? There are plants that are dying, and the leaves drop down and nourish the soil. And so this leads to what a lot of people refer to as chop and drop nourishment of the soil in plants, where you're removing foliage, you're cleaning up the plants, and then you're chopping and then literally dropping it onto the soil, and that allows for the plants not only to be a mulch to the soil, which they're really beneficial as mulch, but also the theory is that they are going to break down and those nutrients are going to be taken back up. Hi, Teresa. Let's see. There we go. What was I saying? What was I just talking about? Chop and drop. So chop and drop. So it's really good for mulch, for dropping everything down. It is less effective for really getting those nutrients back into the soil, because one of the keys and one of the reasons why this recipe is so beneficial is that you have to have those nutrients are not available as the leaf. When we have a leaf like this, so this is comfrey, one of the most common, most popular chop and drop kind of herbs to use, and it's beneficial and also problematic. If we're just chopping this and dropping it onto the soil, it's going to act as mulch. It's going to protect the soil from excessive heat, from sun. It's going to decrease the amount of moisture leaving the soil. So as a barrier over the soil, it's going to be really beneficial. But the nutrients in this leaf aren't available to the plants until they are fermented, until they're broken down by soil organisms. And so if you want it to be beneficial to the plants, it needs to be either, if you're chopping it and then dropping it in the soil, it needs to be turned into the soil. It needs to have soil put on top of it. It needs to go under the soil in order for those organisms to have contact with the plant so that it can break those down. And now all of those nutrients are going to be bioavailable for the plant. So that's an important thing to remember when you're just assuming that it's going to be available. It isn't. I do want to talk a little bit about comfrey as one of the plants for this. Comfrey is probably one of the best known plants for this method of nourishing other plants. It is often used as a single plant in this recipe, just comfrey in a tea blend for this. Comfrey contains a constituent of concern we want to be aware of, and that is a compound called pyrrolizidine alkaloids. Folks online, can you read that? I need to get a new pen. Oh, well, you can if I turn it. There you go. So pyrrolizidine alkaloids, or PAs, so you'll see them abbreviated as PAs. Pyrrolizidine alkaloids are the potentially toxic compounds that are in comfrey. And I've done classes on comfrey, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. But the toxicity of comfrey is a definite concern. We don't want to minimize that. It is also a plant that I use internally occasionally, so you can use it. You just need to be mindful of it. There's a relatively recent study that shows that the pyrrolizidine alkaloids that are in comfrey are able to migrate through the soil and be taken up by other plants that are growing within the range of the comfrey. They've specifically seen this in lemon balm. Lemon balm that was grown in the same bed as comfrey had pyrrolizidine alkaloids in the lemon balm, and they are not a compound that's seen in lemon balm. They are hepatotoxic. When they're taken into the body, the liver converts them into a different form, and as they exit the liver, they cause damage to the hepatic vein, causing what's called veno-occlusive disease over a long period of time. That's an irreversible change in the structure of that hepatic vein, and so we do really want to be cautious about pyrrolizidine alkaloids. How much is taken up by the lemon balm in that in that interspecies transfer through soil, how much is in there, how much is then taken up into our bodies and is available for use. We don't know those, but it is there. And so it's just something that you want to be mindful of when you are choosing comfrey as one of the plants for this. It is fine to use comfrey for houseplants. If you're making this just for your inner plants, not a problem, because you're not going to be ingesting them, right? So toxicity is not going to be an issue. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, me too. Thank you. So comfrey, sure, we can use some in here, but we want to be mindful of it. Another thing that you want to be mindful of is, so this would be one of the examples of like a tea. You got this tea and you decided, I really don't like this. This is a funky tasting tea. I'm never going to drink this. You could open up these tea bags and throw them into something like this. However, this tea is Breathe Easy, and this one has eucalyptus in it. Eucalyptus is a plant that is, here's another vocab word, allelopathic. Allelopathy is inhibition of the growth of plants around that plant, right? So when eucalyptus grows, the leaves that eucalyptus creates are allelopathic. When the eucalyptus leaves drop down onto the soil, no other plants are able to grow in that soil because eucalyptus is kind of claiming it for its own, all right? So allelopathy allows plants to spread and create these large stands. That's why we often see these big, huge stands of eucalyptus and other plants that are allelopathic. So we would not want to put eucalyptus in a tea like this, just like you want to be cautious if you're getting one of the wonderful things in Long Beach is we have the community mulch, right? The city goes around and cuts back trees and they'll chip them and then they throw them in a big huge pile over at Willow Springs Park. And so you can go and you can just get mulch for your garden, for your paths, for anything. It's free. You just take bins and take it away. It's awesome stuff. However, if they have been cutting back eucalyptus trees and there's eucalyptus in that mulch, it's very bad to put in your garden unless it's an area in your garden where you know you're not going to be wanting to grow things, right? So we want to be mindful of eucalyptus in our. Likewise, here's another one, another kind of typifier of herbs that we wouldn't want to put in here. This is Western red cedar tips. Western red cedar tips are beautiful. They are strong medicine. They're just gorgeous. They're so lovely. Western red cedar is thuja. And this is what the compound thujone is named for, right? So thujone rich plants, not just Western red cedar, but also, I thought I brought over, I guess not, wormwood. Is also very high in thujone. So these are compounds that are toxic, neurotoxic to us. And so we don't want to be putting toxic plants or really what we tend to think of as strong medicinal plants, right? This is not a recipe for strong medicine. This is a recipe for nourishment. We're nourishing the plants as they nourish us. So strong medicines like Western red cedar, wormwood, things like that don't belong in a recipe like this. But things like dandelion leaf, absolutely. Yarrow is great in this. In fact, yarrow is one of the plants that a sort of similar concept of this is used in biodynamic farming. And they use yarrow and horsetail and a couple of other plants in these long ferments, specialized long ferments in a very ritualistic manner are then applied to plants, and we see significant changes in the growth habits of those plants. So yarrow is a great plant to put in here. So we'll start building up the recipe as I'm talking about what goes in here. And this is one of those soup recipes. So I've just got a whole bunch of dandelion leaf, or I cut my dandelion back. Right? I have a whole bunch of dandelion growing in my garden and I don't need it, so I'm gonna cut all of that back and I'm gonna throw it into this this blend. For me, I'm just gonna do the dandelion tea here. Now I don't know that I mean, I'm doing this for you folks because I love you, but I wouldn't necessarily use my really good, brand new, fresh, gorgeous plants for this. This is for the sketchy, I don't know what to do with this. This is kind of old plants. If you have old tea blends, or maybe you have a tea blend that got like infested, right? You got those Indian moths, you know, the meal moths get into things. If you get an infestation and they can get into your teas, and you're like, oh no, you're gonna throw it away. You have to get it out. This is a good way to use it, right? And you can add to these, by the way, as they're fermenting. So an old tea blend, as long as that tea blend doesn't have strong medicinal herbs in it, right? You can throw that in. This is one that was just past date. It's just been hanging out for a little while. Here's another one. Now this is one of our defense blends, and yeah, it's just, I could keep it and drink it, but I've got a whole bunch of it, so I don't need that. So we'll just put it into this blend here. So we've got nourishing blends. Now, yellow dock, generally we're not going to be putting roots into this formula, primarily because, what kind of recipe we're doing? Oh, hi Teresa. We're doing, this is a plant, what's called a weed tea, sometimes referred to as a compost tea if you're doing it in a different style. This is a tea blend for your plants. Passion herbs, if you added bay leaf to your teas, would it keep those moths away? Yeah, bay is a great thing. I mean, you could add it to teas because there's the whole question of, does bay have any flavor at all anyway? The eternal question. You can also just put bay leaves in your cabinet. I have a bay tree in the back of my house, and so I would just clip those and like shove them in the cabinets, and that works really, really well. So yeah, bay is definitely one of the plants used for that. We don't generally want to use the starchy roots in something like this because this is not a formula where we want to have a lot of starchy herbs. It's not appropriate for sugars to be in this type of a formula. Sugars are going to promote more and different fermentation than we want. So we're going to keep the high starch roots, things like astragalus and burdock and dandelion, things like that. We'll keep those out. However, I've got yellow dock, and yellow dock is a very good root to use in here. It is a fixer of minerals, so it's going to bump up that mineral content in different ways. It is a low starch content, so it's going to be fine in there. So we'll throw some of that. Yarrow, because yeah, why not yarrow? We'll throw some yarrow in there. And then I also have, good idea. Yeah, putting them in the cabinet is it's just so easy. I started doing that just because I didn't want to take them off of the stems, right? I didn't want to garble the whole thing and put them, so I was just shoving them in, and that worked great. So we'll throw some yarrow in. Now the nice thing about this tea, and I'll talk about how to use this, how to make it, and then how to use this in just a little bit. There's some yarrow in there. Let me get these out of the way that we've done. We're finished with those, except for that one. Here's another concept. When we're making a mineral-rich tea for ourselves, for human ingestion, we're looking at minerals as the primary constituents of interest. What are things that we would not want to have in a mineral-rich tea blend if we wanted to increase absorption? I think y'all can figure this one. This is in your wheelhouse to know. What do you want to limit in a tea blend that has a lot of minerals if you want to make those minerals bioavailable? What grabs onto minerals and makes them? Yeah, tannins, yes. So we want to avoid tannins generally in a tea blend where we're looking at mineral bioavailability, because tannins grab onto minerals, right? They grab onto minerals and form insoluble mineral tannates. And so generally, if you have a plant from the rose family plants usually have a very high amount of tannins in them. They're known for that. And so if we have a tannin-rich plant, we're certainly not going to add it to a tea blend where we're trying to maximize mineral content. However, this isn't for us. and it's not going to be going into our system. This is some agrimony. Agrimony would be one of these plants you might have, or it typifies a plant that you might have just as a weed growing out in your garden, and you needed to bulk up. You needed a little bit of more just volume of herb in here. So the agrimony in here is going to bind with the minerals. It's going to be less bioavailable, but the next step is going to neutralize that. So we'll go into that in just a little bit. So this is all the dried plants. Now, there are some other things that I want to show you that you could be bringing in from your garden that would also be beneficial for this. And these are just things that I kind of grabbed outside. We were talking about cutting back dandelion and throwing it in there. So we've got so much plantain that grows in our garden beds there, right? And plantain is taking all of this that we want to think about is the capturing of resources and recycling those resources, putting them back into the ground. So anything that is growing up from the ground is inherently taking resources from that ground and presenting it as foliage. So grabbing all of that, we've got the plantain here, will be wonderful for that. I do have a little bit more comfrey. We can throw the comfrey in there, but we want to be cautious and mindful in use of comfrey. I've got avocado leaves. Avocado leaves coming down from the avocado tree there would be beautiful in there. Peppermint. Oh, no, I wanted to show you. So plantain leaves are great. Plantain seeds would be a bad idea, all right? Because these would be enhanced in their ability to germinate because they would be in this blend hanging out, and then you'd be pouring this onto your soil and you would have billions of new plantain plants. Even if you love plantain, don't be doing that. So you want to be sure to take out any seeds from any of your weed plants before you're doing this with weeds. Let's see. And then you want to look at your plants. If you're cutting back plants, you might have a plant. So this is our California mugwort. This would not be a good candidate for this because this is stronger medicine. However, if you live in a place where you have the European mugwort, right, that has a much milder taste. We can tell that that is not as strong medicine as the California native mugwort. So this one I wouldn't add to this formula, but the European mugwort, sure, I would put it in small amounts. But in selecting the plants for this, you want to be careful. If you have a plant that's growing like this right next to another one, consider that it could be that it just got broken off, but it also could be that there's some disease there. And if you take a plant with some disease and you put it into this, it's kind of like those seeds. It is going to be taking root. You're putting it into a medium where it can grow. You're giving it nutrients. You're allowing it time to proliferate. And so you'd be then taking that, feeding it, and then distributing it amongst your plants. So don't be doing that. You always want to make sure that any plants that you're doing in this method are going to be good quality. We cut back a bunch of lemongrass the other day. Lemongrass is all of the grasses. So this is kind of a plug for like grass clippings as well, right? All of the grasses have silica. You can hear the silica in here rubbing against itself, right? So grasses tend to accumulate silica as a structural compound. That silica is really beneficial for other plants to take up from the soil to help with the structural integrity of the plants, just as it helps with us. So we can take the lemongrass, or again, grass clippings, just if you have if you don't have a lawn, someone who has a lawn around you, you can take a handful or two of those grass clippings and throw that into your weed tea blend and bump up that silica content, or take any other grasses. All right, so you're going to just take whatever plants are appropriate for your needs, or the ones that you have extra amounts of, and you're going to throw them into a bucket. All right, so here's a bucket, and I'm going to put in about 2 handfuls. There's no recipe. more is going to make it stronger. And you'll just, if it's very, very strong, you're going to want to dilute it more. So you're going to throw in just a couple of handfuls of your tea blend in here. And then a very important part of that is you're going to want some really good soil. So soil from a thriving bed, soil from a bed that has a lot of diversity of plants that are growing in it that you know is just really, really good. Because this is the soil organisms that are going to activate all of this. Again, remember, it is not just the nutrients coming from the plants. It is those nutrients that come from the plants that have then been fermented and become bioavailable. It is this process, the throwing in of the soil and then the long aging process, which is going to break down those tannin chelating agents and make those minerals then back to being bioavailable. All of the nutrients in here are going to be bioavailable once this is done. So we throw a handful of dirt in there, and then we're going to fill this up with water. This is about a gallon. So I've got about 2 handfuls and about a gallon of water, and then I'm going to cover it. You're going to want to cover it because this is going to get nasty. Here's the downside to this, that you don't want to do this inside. You need to find somewhere outside because this is going to age and it's going to ferment, and you've got weeds in there and you've got soil and you've got water, and it's going to get stinky. The plants love that stinkiness, but we do not. Flies are also going to love that stinkiness. All sorts of things are going to love that stinkiness that you're not going to love. So put a lid on it. Don't put the lid on very, very tightly because it is going to be fermenting and there's going to be gases forming. So you need to allow those gases a way out. So you want it completely covered, but also kind of lightly on there. Fill it with water, set it to the side, and leave it for about a month. Now, right now is a really good time to be doing this because we are at the start of September, which is just unbelievable to me that we're at the start of September, but that means that in a month it's going to be October, and October is primary growing season here in Southern California. Now, I know a lot of you are not in Southern California, and so you're all getting ready to put your beds to bed, right? You're getting ready to put your gardens away for the year, because you're going into your dormant season. But here, summer is the dormant season in Southern California. This is our dormant season. And so we're going into, we're getting really excited because fall planting is what we do. This is our second cool season. And so we're going to be getting ready to put cool weather crops into the soil, starting seeds, putting native plants into the soil. This is big growing season. So making this now means that it's going to be available to us as a resource as we start planting our plants. But it's good for use pretty much every time. The one time I don't like to use a blend like this is during the summer for plants in our region, for outdoor plants in our region, because it is a time of dormancy. And you don't want to be giving plants something that stimulates growth in a time of dormancy because you're going to cause new growth to form, but that new growth is very tender and delicate, and it's going to be more susceptible to heat and dryness from summer. So it's just best not to. Just leave things alone, give them water to go through there, but it's in the fall that we're going to start feeding more heavily. So we're going to let this ferment for a month. At the end of that month, it's going to be stinky. We're going to strain it through some cheesecloth or fabric. You're probably not going to want to use that fabric again. Maybe you will. But strain it well through that. And now you have a concentrated weed tea. And you can put that into a gallon container. Just get a plastic gallon container and keep that. That now you can use in a couple of different ways. You grow year-round, Teresa? Yeah. It's wonderful to do. It's just different. And the thing to remember if you do live in a year-round growing season area is that most of the books of gardening are written by East Coast folks or Europeans, and those people do not have year-round gardening. And so the message that you get about when it's time to grow something, when it's time to harvest something, almost anything having to do a time of year in the garden doesn't apply to us. It's not where we are. So you always have to interpret it, right? It's always so valuable when you can find a gardening book that's written by a bioregional person who gets what you get here. Okay, so you've strained it. You now have it in your container. It'll last for a very long time in your container. Just keep it outside still. It still is pretty stinky. As you use it, you're going to dilute it. It is generally going to be in about a 1 to 4 dilution. So 1 part of this concentrated tea to 4 parts of water. And that can be applied to your plants in a couple of different ways. So you can use it as a foliar spray. Foliar refers to foliage, so that's the leaves. You can put this into a spray bottle and spray it directly onto the leaves. Most plants take up quite a lot of nutrients from the leaves. And that also is really good if you happen to have a lot of pests on your leaves. So something like this is particularly beneficial for strengthening the immune system of the plant. When you have a plant with low immunity, it's going to be subject to pests a lot more. You're going to see aphids on it. You're going to see a whitefly. You're going to see powdery mildew. You're going to see all of the diseases on it because it's not resilient enough to withstand that. So just like we want to support our immune system when we're always getting those diseases, we want to support the immune system of our plants. And so this type of a thing is excellent for that. Regular application in a foliar spray. So applying it to the tops and the bottoms of the leaves, drenching those. You really want to drench the leaves completely. Take them outside and just spray this up and down all over those leaves. Let it dry. Don't let the sun get directly on those leaves while it's got this foliar drench on it. You've got a lot of nitrogen in there, and that can cause some brown spots on your leaves. But yeah, and then bring it in, and repeatedly doing that is going to make your plants immediately healthy. And you can often see a very rapid response of plants to foliar feeding. Longer term feeding, but more foundational, is using it as a soil drench. And so this just means pouring it onto the soil, using it as a feeding your plants. So before you water in the plants, you're going to drench the soil with this, and then water it in so that the water can drop that down deeper into the soil and it can get to the roots. And we want it in the roots. It's also beneficial if you have diseases that tend to be in the roots. Yeah, trial and error, definitely, Teresa. Yes. Would this tea be good for aloe too? Yeah, it's great for aloe. It's great. Really, I don't know of a plant for which this isn't appropriate. Yeah, it's great for all plants. The one time you don't want to use this as a foliar drench is for the really fuzzy leafed plants. They don't really love foliar drenches. But otherwise, everyone else, yeah, on the soil. And for those, you can still use it as a soil treatment, right? How often you want to do this kind of depends on the plant. Some plants are very heavy feeders. Generally, if you have a plant that is a tropical plant, that is a plant that's used to having very rich soil, right? The soil that's fed by a lot of plants breaking down, a lot of fermentation, a lot of volcanic soil. So you're going to want to be feeding those plants quite a lot. Native plants to Southern California generally thrive on a low nutrient soil. They're not used to having a lot of nutrients, and so giving them a lot of nutrients isn't always valuable to them. So know the plant and how much nutrition it needs, and give it to them appropriately. Yeah. Any questions? It's a pretty easy concept, but it's an important one. And really, the take home for this is don't throw away your old teas and old herbs, but also when you are cutting back plants. Anytime you're cutting back plants, assess the plant, the quality of the plant. Is it good and healthy? Does it not have a lot of strong medicinal chemistry to it? Is it going to be valuable in something like this? And then whether it's fresh or dried, you can just have a bucket going and just throw that in the bucket as you're cutting things back, processing it as you're going. There's going to be some things that are diseased or questionable or not appropriate, but eventually you're just going to have a bucket full. Now, if you're making this with fresh plants, you want to have the bucket all the way full. So if it's dried plants, a couple of handfuls in per gallon, but if it's fresh plants, because those wilt down so much, they're mostly water. So you could have this loosely full all the way with your just cut back plants. And again, you can do this with your houseplants too, if you're a person who doesn't have outdoor plants. As you're cutting back your houseplants, as long as there's no disease, there's no pests, you can go in this and do the same process. handy thing to know about. It's really excellent for tomato plants. Tomato plants are very heavy feeders. They're really heavy feeders. And so, yeah, you want to drench the soil and also, it froze. We were doing so well with the technology for a little while until we weren't. Maybe it unfrozen, I don't know. Let me know, people. It looks frozen on my end, and I don't know if it's frozen on your end. But it would help with tomatoes when they're low in calcium. When tomatoes don't have enough calcium in the soil, they get a blight, little black spots on the blossom end. And that is an indication of calcium deficiency in the soil. Now, you can't just give them calcium because it has to be converted by those soil organisms. But something like this has a lot of calcium in it, and it's been converted. So this would be really beneficial for tomato plants. Yeah. So there you go. There's our recipe for the day. So you can take home, there's some bags right there. And if you just fill one of those bags with this blend, you could take it home. Now that would be about a handful and a half. I would do maybe a quart jar, right? So a quart jar with that bag, and just throw it, fill it with water, black screen, but with audio. Okay, alrighty, so there we go. It's just technology and me, everything I touch. Yeah, so you're going to take a handful, throw it in there, put it into that jar, keep it outside. Be sure to not, that jar will explode. If you put that in there and you tighten the lid on that and you put it outside, the pressure inside will build, and that could crack that jar. So just be sure you're just putting a lid on top of it, and use it for your plants. Any questions about that? No? All right, pretty straightforward class. There you go. Sorry, folks. Could this work with young trees, saplings? I would imagine that it would be really great. Again, young trees really would be particularly beneficial because in a young tree you don't have a root system that is as deep and complex as it's going to be later on. And so with a limited root system, you have a limited access to soil nutrients. So foliar feeding for a sapling with a root system that isn't the big, abundant root system it's going to be could be really great. With an older tree, maybe less important because the trees rely so much really on that root system for the foliage. Right? But yeah, I would absolutely use it on young trees. This is also a very good thing to spray onto seedlings in general. If you're starting seeds, now we're not in seed starting season right now, but again, in about a month or two, we will be in seed starting season. And as you're starting seeds, they can be really subject to disease. And you can have disease come in and just wipe out a whole tray of seedlings. But you can spray with this, and that will inhibit a lot of the fungal diseases that tend to wipe out seedlings. Work with all herbal plants as well, and vegetable plants. Yeah, just not furry plants. Exactly. Yeah, it's going to work with pretty much everything. It's a way of making fertilizer. That's basically what we're doing. We're making a fertilizer, but we're making a fertilizer that is primarily nitrogen rich. So if you look at fertilizers in the nursery, they have 3 letters. They have the NPK letters. N stands for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, and K for potassium. So that tells you the concentration of those 3 elements in the bag. And so sometimes the NPK numbers it'll say 10 10 10. So it's high amounts of all 3 of those. So nitrogen for foliar growth, potassium and phosphorus are for forming flowers, forming fruit, and forming roots. So depending on the ratios of those numbers, you can tell if a fertilizer is going to be better for something that has more foliage, or if it's going to be better for flowers or fruits or something for roots, right? You can choose your your fertilizer appropriately. The problem is that those generally, they adjust those numbers up and down by artificially bumping up those nutrients, and so that can be problematic and you don't get a good balance. With this, I don't know what the NPK numbers are, but it's also not just nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. There are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of other minerals that are in there and other nutrients that are also going to be really beneficial for the plants, and also all of the metabolites of fermentation that are also going to be really beneficial. So as a fertilizer for pretty much all of your plants, it's going to be way better than what you can get, and it's free, and it's reusing stuff. Yeah.
Does this have to be used as the wheat tea, or can it be like the chop and drop as you?
Yeah, you could just pour it into the soil. Absolutely. If you just wanted to take this and just, you don't have to keep it like that at all. You could take this out, especially if you start to have like a lot of buckets because you're like being really good about this, and now you have 4 buckets of it. Take it out and just pour it into the soil of plants around you, and then water it in really well, right? That would take the place of dilution, right? But yeah, absolutely. You can just dump it anywhere where you think that plants, that the soil needs nourishment. Even if you're not planting in an area, maybe you want to be planting in an area in the spring, but you want to start preparing that area now. You could make this and start pouring it into that soil, and by the time spring comes, that soil is going to be nourished and ready to go, and that's going to be great for planting stuff in, right? Yeah. So how do you feel about manure teas? So manure teas, the problem is there's so much other stuff in manure because there's so much stuff in what we feed our meat animals. So I don't like manure teas all that much. However, like I made some manure tea. I didn't mean to do it, but I made it with my friend Bethany has bunnies. She raises rabbits. They're what's the name? It's long fur rabbits, and they she collects the fur and makes yarn out of it and weaves with it. It's what's the name of the bunnies? Angora. Thank you, Tuko. Yes, Angora. So she has these Angora bunnies, and they're just wonderful. So she gave me some rabbit poop because rabbit poop is awesome for feeding your plants. It's not hot like chicken poop. It doesn't have to be aged like the horse poop. It's just ready to go. So I had that in a bucket, and I had it outside, and then it rained, and then I had a bucket full of manure tea, but with the rabbit poop. And because the rabbits got fed pretty clean ingredients, that would be fine. Horse poop. So the only thing about the horse poop, I think that would be certainly a lot better than the manure. So I wouldn't trust the manure that you buy in like a nursery. It's just the bags of manure. I wouldn't try. Probably what the horses are fed, and they're probably cleaner than the cows. Yeah, but it depends on where you get it. But yeah, rabbit poop is awesome stuff. Chicken poop is also really, really good. Aged chicken poop, if you know people who have chickens, if their poop just ages for 6 months or so, that's also really great to use.
I use my guinea pig's poop.
Guinea pig poop would also probably be very much like rabbit poop. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Poop is great if you can get it. Worm poop is also really, really great. If you have a worm bin or know anyone who does verma composting, you can also use worm poop for that too. All right, enough about poop. There you go. So hopefully that recipe is helpful for you. I find it to be a great recipe, and I always have just buckets of stuff around fermenting in my backyard. So go feed your plants and go through your tea cabinet and recycle any old bins of teas that you have and make this blend. All right, I will see you. Oh, you're welcome. Good to see you, Teresa. Good to see everyone. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye. Sorry about the technology. I'm glad you all could at least still hear me, even if we lost the visual. All right. Oh, thank you so much. Love y'all. I will see you next week. Mwah. Bye-bye.